Welcome back, young scholars. In this video we will be discussing everyone's favorite empire, the Mongols. So the big questions you need to be able to answer after watching this video are: first, how did the Mongols build the largest land-based empire in world history? Second, what was similar about the Mongol rule in China, Persia, and Russia, and then what was different? Third, what caused the fall of the Mongol Khanates? Fourth, how did the Ming Dynasty restore order to China? So then we'll switch gears and focus on the Ming Dynasty. So how did the Mongols build the largest land-based empire in world history? So who are these Mongols? So the Mongols were a group of pastoral nomadic peoples living in the eastern steppes of Central Asia. Because they were pastoral nomads, they were very adept at horseback riding and also archery. According to sources, they were so skilled at horseback riding they could actually sleep while riding on the backs of their horses. So they excelled at archery and horseback riding, which is going to come in very handy when you need to conquer a whole bunch of places very quickly. Before 1200, the Mongols lived in decentralized tribes and clans. In this region right here, you can see the Mongols were just one of many smaller groups who inhabited this region. And eventually they would become unified and align into confederations. And the title that is given to the leader of the Mongol Confederation is Khan. And when we are describing the state, that is a Khanate, in the same way that a sultan rules over a sultanate and the caliph rules over a caliphate. The leader of the Khanate is known as the Khan. So the most famous Khan was Genghis Khan, although this doesn't really do Genghis Khan justice. There we go, we gotta make him a little scarier looking. So Genghis Khan's birth name was actually Temujin. He was born the son of a chief, but of a small little tribe made up of Mongols. He is going to eventually unite these warring Mongol tribes that are in this region right here of Central Asia on the steppes. He is going to expand the Mongol Empire using his tremendous military and organizational skills. Pretty incredible. I mean, he was illiterate himself, couldn't read or write, but had just instinctual ability to both understand military tactics. So for example, whenever he would conquer a place, he would adapt a lot of the techniques and tactics that are necessary in fighting different styles of warfare. He also had great organizational skills. He organized his military into various units. He promoted people based upon their merit and not based upon birth. Now, we think about this Mongol Empire and we can compare it to previous empires that we've studied. So we talked about the Achaemenid Persian Empire and Alexander's Empire and the Roman Empire and the Han Dynasty in China, the Mauryan Empire, the Byzantine Empire, the Islamic Caliphates, the Umayyad and Abbasid Caliphates, but none of those really compare just in the sheer scale and size to the Mongol Empire. So after Genghis Khan's death, the Mongols established the largest land-based empire in world history, which spanned China all the way over to Eastern Europe and included Persia, Russia, and China. And so Genghis Khan conquered northern China and also parts of Persia by himself. Later his descendants would take this territory up in Russia and also southern China. Again, as I described earlier, Genghis Khan and the Mongols were extraordinarily adept at adapting new military technology from the places they conquered, and also utilizing new techniques in order to change the style of warfare that they needed to use in battle. So for example, when they went to China and they had to attack these large cities, they learned siege warfare techniques. They developed catapults, things that they clearly wouldn't need to use when they were engaging in battle on the open steppes where, horses and archery were all that was really needed. Now they had to figure out ways and conquer cities and overcome these large walls and barriers, and they were able to do it. And one of the techniques that they learned was gunpowder from China, and eventually they are going to be responsible for spreading gunpowder all the way over to Europe. Now the Mongol Empire eventually, after Genghis Khan's death, is going to split apart into various khanates. So we have the Khanate of the Great Khan, which included the sort of homeland of Mongolia and also China. We have the Khanate of the Golden Horde, which we can really just sort of associate with Russia. We have the Chagatai Khanate, which is in Central Asia, and then we have the Il Khanate, which is in Persia. So the empire begins to split apart over who should succeed Genghis Khan as a leader. It's very similar to really what happened to Alexander's empire, if you recall, shortly after Alexander the Great's death. So it's going to split apart into these 4 khanates ruled by Genghis Khan's descendants, and Genghis Khan had lots of descendants. 0.5% of the world's population trace their lineage back to Genghis Khan. So what was similar about Mongol rule in China, Persia, and Russia, and what was different? So one similarity among the places that the Mongols ruled was that they generally allowed the people they conquered to maintain and practice their own traditional cultures and customs. For example, they were relatively tolerant of all religions. The Mongols initially practiced an animistic style of religion, but when they would conquer a place like China, many of them converted to Buddhism. When they conquered Persia, they converted to Islam. When they conquered Russia, they converted to Eastern Orthodox Christianity. And generally speaking, they were pretty chill with various religions being practiced by the peoples they conquered. The Mongols have this reputation for being these ruthless conquerors, which they were, but they also establish a lot of stability across Eurasia. So there's this period known as the Pax Mongolica, this period of peace and security under Mongol rule that is going to lead to increased trade. So it's really under the Mongol Empire that we're going to see the reawakening of the Silk Road, which had kind of gone into a period of decline in the 10th, 11th, and 12th centuries. And so we're going to see really the reemergence of the Silk Road. And so there's increased transmission of trade, and the reason for that is the Mongols provided security and protection to merchants along the Silk Road. There's one source that said that a person could walk across the entire Mongol Empire with a gold plate on top of his head. And as we'll find out, some travelers did actually cross all of Eurasia during this period of the Mongol rule. So let's start by talking about the Khanate of the Great Khan. And so with these foreign invaders, these Mongols coming into China, one of the things that the Mongols did was to incorporate themselves into that dynasty system. They called themselves the Yuan dynasty. They claimed the mandate of heaven. And so you have to remember that the Yuan dynasty were really the Mongols. Now, the Yuan dynasty was led by Genghis Khan's grandson, Kublai Khan. So Kublai Khan was successful in conquering southern China and reunifying China. There was an attempt by the Mongols to expand even beyond China and the Korean peninsula. They tried to conquer Japan, and ultimately they were unsuccessful. There was actually 2 large typhoons on both attempts that the Mongols made to attack Japan, and therefore the Mongols were unsuccessful in invading Japan. So the Mongols are going to set up a permanent bureaucracy in China, much like the earlier Chinese dynasties had done. They just wove themselves into the bureaucratic fabric that the Chinese had already established. But they did not utilize the civil service exam system. So they ultimately segregated themselves from the Chinese. They prohibited intermarriage between Mongols and Chinese, and we're going to see something very similar in other societies as a way of establishing ethnic divisions within a society. So there was no intermarriage that was allowed. They are going to import government officials really from all over their empire. One of the more famous government officials that was brought in is a guy named Marco Polo. So Marco Polo was an Italian merchant who traveled essentially the entire length of the Silk Road, making his way to the court of Kublai Khan, where he served as an advisor to Kublai Khan. One of the reasons Marco Polo is so important is he is going to raise interest among Europeans in things from East Asia. So the Mongols in China, like they were in other places, were culturally tolerant. They allowed the Chinese to practice Buddhism and continue ancestor worship, and many Mongols, in fact, converted to Buddhism as well as they integrated with the population. Now we're going to contrast that with the Khanate of the Golden Horde, which is really the Mongol rule over Russia. And the Mongols, instead of establishing a permanent bureaucracy like they had in China, they instead just sort of periodically invaded. They did not set up a permanent bureaucracy. Instead, they relied on a tribute system, meaning they allowed local Russian princes to continue to rule their various regions. However, they demanded local rulers to pay tribute to the Mongols. And if they didn't pay tribute, if they failed to pay tribute, guess what? The Mongols would be back and conquering and invading. So this is a different kind of state system, right? Not a permanent bureaucracy, but instead a tributary system. And so as a result, the Russians are going to essentially move their capital from Kiev to Moscow. And the reason for that was because there were Mongols who were living down in this region of the Black Sea. This is where they could kind of pasture their horses. And so they were very close to Kiev. So as a result, we see this sort of shift in Russian power away from where the Mongols were continuing invading and eventually moving north to the modern day city of Moscow. Right in the middle of the way in which the Mongols ruled over China and the way they ruled over Russia was the way they ruled over Persia, what's known as the Il Khanate. They essentially conquered the Abbasid Caliphate, what was left of the Islamic State, in some respects inserted themselves into a bureaucratic framework, but they also allowed a lot of local Persians to maintain power and control. They are going to convert to Islam, much like they converted to Buddhism in China and to Eastern Orthodox Christianity in Russia. So what caused the fall of the Mongol Khanates? Well, there were a number of reasons. First, there were internal peasant rebellions. As you can imagine, not everyone enjoyed being ruled by the Mongols. So, for example, the Russian princes eventually are going to rise up and say, we're no longer going to be paying this tribute to you Mongols, once the Mongols were sufficiently weakened that they no longer felt threatened by them. We're going to see something very similar in China with the overthrow of the Yuan dynasty, the Mongols, and the replacement by the Ming dynasty. The plague was also an important causal factor of Mongol decline. The plague spreads as a result of the Pax Mongolica, this Mongol peace that came about, and so the plague is going to spread widely across the Mongol Empire from China all the way over to Persia. The Mongols are also going to adopt in China the system of paper money, of currency, of flying money that had been developed during the Tang and Song dynasty. And so they continually printed this money, and ultimately that caused inflation, so the devaluation of currency. And all of these factors are going to eventually lead to the collapse of these various khanates. So how did the Ming dynasty restore order to China? So ultimately, with the collapse of the Yuan dynasty, the Mongols in China, we have the replacement by the Ming. So the Ming are going to say, look, we want to go back to the past, right? We've had this disruption. These foreigners came in and invaded. There's the outbreak of the plague, which led to the death of millions of people in China. We want to restore order by looking back at how rulers ruled in the past. And so they're going to bring back Confucianism, which had somewhat gone out of style as a result of the Mongols failing to use the civil service exam system. The Ming are going to bring back that civil service exam system. And the Ming are also going to reestablish China's role within the tribute system. So they are going to bring back these classic traditions of China, like Confucianism, the civil service exam system, and the tribute system. And we can see this, for example, in the voyages of an admiral named Zheng He. As a eunuch, he would be an advisor to the emperor, and he was this Muslim admiral. Yes, he was Muslim and Chinese. And he was this Muslim admiral. He was sent on these treasure voyages to reestablish the tribute system. And so he leaves from China with this massive fleet of 200 ships, and they are traveling on various voyages down here into Southeast Asia and ultimately to South Asia, to the Middle East, and going as far as East Africa. Now, ultimately, there is going to be a discontinuation of the treasure voyages, And that's going to play a very important role because at this point, China really is at a peak of global power and hegemony. But as a result of the discontinuation of the treasure voyages and this slow turn that China begins to make towards isolationism, we can see though how massive these ships are. These are Zheng He had many of these junk ships, and we can compare that to the ships of Christopher Columbus. And so really the belief is if Christopher Columbus could have discovered the Americas using these ships in 1492, then had these treasure voyages continued, then Zheng He may have discovered the Americas using these huge ships, and he was sailing in the 1420s and 1430s. As a result of watching this video, you should be able to answer these big questions. How did the Mongols build the largest land-based empire in world history? What was similar about Mongol rule in China, Persia, and Russia, and what was different? What caused the fall of the Mongol Khanates? And then how did the Ming Dynasty seek to restore order in China? Thanks for watching.